Right, so Israel is offering new immigrants and returning residents a 0% income tax rate for 2026, rising in stages afterwards on earnings up to 1 million shekels. That sits on top of the 10-year exemption that's already in place on foreign income under the law of return. Full tax holidays, and all during a wartime deficit, all while Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, the mass killing of civilians, the destruction of hospitals and homes and universities, and the forced displacement of the population as have been documented over 2 very long years now, and amid multiple violations of the current ceasefire. The record, despite Israel's best efforts, is a public one. The death toll is very much civilian, the siege very much engineered by them. Yet at the same time, Israelis have been leaving in droves themselves, especially those working in the tech sector, which Israel is so proud of. The departures are logged, the economy's freefall is documented, and the government is trying to sell these tax breaks as some kind of Zionist revival. When a homeland, inverted commas, has to pay its own people to come home, also in inverted commas, then clearly it is nothing of the sort to them. Zionism is clearly finished if you have to bribe Jews now to engage with it, bribe Jews to move to Israel. Right, so a state calling itself the Jewish homeland has begun paying Jews to live there now. Israel is literally offering new immigrants and returning residents a 0% income tax rate for the year 2026, with the rate rising in stages afterwards. The policy was announced to great fanfare. Therefore, it's not just a rumour, it's not a trial thing, it's a budget measure. The government has set out the timeline and the thresholds and all of the eligibility conditions required for this. The offer sits alongside an existing 10-year exemption, as I mentioned a moment ago, which is on foreign income for new immigrants and those who have lived abroad for a decade or longer. So anyone, anywhere, paying tax will know this is not a minor offer. These are not marginal deductions at all. These are full exemptions, 100% tax breaks. The state is suspending its claim to tax revenue full stop for a defined group of arrivals. Why on earth would any state do that? The eligibility process runs through the Population and Immigration Authority and the Tax Authority in Israel. The classification of an applicant as a new immigrant or senior returning resident determines access to this exemption. Proof of foreign residence for 10 consecutive years is required for that foreign income exemption. But the requirements are listed in the Residency Determination Guidelines. The domestic exemption uses the same residency classifications. The administrative process ties identity status directly to tax status in effect. But the timing of this offer is what makes it especially notable, because it's come at a moment when emigration from Israel, Israelis leaving Israel, especially from Israel's most technologically skilled sectors, has dramatically increased. Reporting has for some time documented a sharp rise in the number of Israelis leaving the country as a result. The departures rose significantly during the first 9 months of the Gaza genocide after October 7th. Companies registered the movement, industry bodies acknowledged the trend. This was a labour market event. It created gaps in the workforce. It weakened the domestic innovation environment. It moved taxable earnings offshore. Combining that with the reservists getting repeatedly called up and the impact on businesses that way, particularly small and medium-sized ones, it's no wonder that some 46,000 of them have gone under over the course of the last 2 years. Those leaving the country full stop only add to that. So the economic situation, already under strain as we knew it was, the incentive was announced despite that though. The OECD outlined the slowdown in confidence and investment, and the Bank of Israel issued warnings that the deficit would exceed the government's own targets without either increased revenue or reduced expenditure. War spending increased the pressure further. Municipalities requested emergency allocations. The health system absorbed additional load, and infrastructure costs mounted. Interest rates remained high to contain inflation, which raised borrowing costs for households and businesses. So investment declined that way as well. Disposable income has all tightened. So the fiscal room to absorb revenue losses has narrowed a lot. So these were not abstract signals in financial reports. These were the changes visible in daily economic conditions in Israel. And it is in this context that the government is introducing a full tax exemption for new immigrants and returning residents, and they're cheering it. But that belies the real desperation behind it all, therefore. The exemption is proceeding whilst the deficit is widening. It makes no economic sense at all. On top of that, the new tax incentive has not replaced that existing one. It's simply been added on top of it. The 10-year exemption on foreign income for immigrants and senior returning residents remains in place. So this 2026 measure adds a domestic exemption to that. One applies to income earned abroad, the other applies to income earned inside Israel. So together, they create a near total tax holiday for those who qualify under both, under the law of return or returning residency status. This is how desperate the Zionist project now is to try and keep itself sustained, because without people being a part of it, without people engaging in it, it's nothing, is it? It requires coordination between the Ministry of Finance, the Tax Authority, and the Population and Immigration Authority. So there's a fair bit of red tape and paperwork to this. Eligibility classification determines access to the exemption. Residency status becomes a fiscal designation, therefore. The state is suspending tax collection for a selected identity group at a moment of financial constraint, which is just utterly mad. But it's what happens when ideology takes precedent, isn't it? The mechanism is bureaucratic, but the reasoning is purely ideological. And that has been borne out by those selling this madness. Bezalel Smotrich has described Zionism as resting on three pillars: on settlement, security, and aliyah. He stated that 2026 would be a year of transformation in aliyah, and that the state would prioritise population intake as a strategic objective. Now, settlement and security need no explanation, I'm sure. We know how Israel implements and attempts to justify both in their illegal activities and their genocidal tendencies. But aliyah refers to the state-administered process of Jewish immigration to Israel. It's the core of what is being done here. The legal basis for it is, of course, the law of return, which was passed in 1950, which grants any Jewish person, and in most cases their immediate family, the automatic right to immigrate and receive citizenship. It's not an open immigration system. It applies only to Jews as defined under Israeli law. Palestinians displaced from the same land do not have an equivalent legal right of return. Aliyah is therefore not just migration, it is an apartheid state policy that shapes the demographic character of the country. The government treats it as a strategic national priority, one of the three pillars Israel's built on, with dedicated ministries, budget lines, and integration programs designed to encourage and facilitate Jewish relocation to Israel, even at Palestinian expense, especially so, I would argue. But despite Smotrich's words, this move was not being solely framed as cultural continuity or heritage preservation. It's being framed as statecraft. Ophir Sofer is the literal minister for aliyah, and he described the administrative infrastructure built to support increased immigration, emphasising data tracking, integration systems, and a programme of inclusion. The policy is not a symbolic welcome, therefore. It's a demographic initiative run through government machinery. It treats population distribution as something that needs to be managed now. And at the same time, settlement expansion in the West Bank has, of course, continued. United Nations human rights officials have issued repeated statements describing the settlements as illegal under international law and calling for their cessation. Land administration records, planning documents, and construction reports all demonstrate ongoing growth because, of course, so many of these people Israel hopes to lure with these 100% tax breaks will end up living in these places. B'Tselem has documented the dual legal system in the West Bank, one governing Jewish settlers and one governing the Palestinians there. Human Rights Watch has described the system as one of domination and systematic disadvantage. The distinction is enforced through law, through zoning authority, through land access, through residency status and movement control. The tax incentive interacts directly with that structure. It adds a financial benefit to membership in the privileged legal category. Identity is mapped onto economic advantage. The law of return grants entry rights to Jews globally, but does not grant equivalent rights to Palestinians displaced from the same land or to their descendants. So the asymmetry at work here is structural. It is legislated, it is enforced, it is apartheid. The new tax incentives reinforce that same division. They create a fiscal difference tied directly to identity. The policy embeds demographic priority into taxation. The tax system itself is segregational and racist. The increase in departures from Israel have been severe and have only increased though. Skilled workers left the country in greater numbers as the economic and political situation deteriorated as a result of the genocide in Gaza and the wider war fronts that Israel has since opened. With them went the taxable income that they raised, investment draw and innovation capacity. The state's response is now to introduce an incentive to attract more Jewish people to replace them, or those who have been gone for more than 10 years. It tells me that Israel knows it doesn't have a cat in hell's chance of winning back those who have recently left, therefore, perhaps because they clearly know far too much. The tax exemption is therefore not merely an immigration benefit, it's a stabilisation measure tied to the state's ideological project, its ideological existence. It is presented as renewal, but it operates as replacement. It maintains a demographic composition that the government considers foundational. The choice to implement this during a deficit and during war spending indicates the priority placed on identity-based population retention and recruitment. The policy places ideology ahead of revenue, ahead of fiscal balance and immediate economic stability. No state can survive operating like that. No doubt other states like the US will be asked to inject cash when they end up a certain creek without a paddle, and no doubt the US will send said cash. But this is what we'll no doubt be asking themselves is, in the America certainly, what I pay my taxes for. A homeland, as Israel incessantly calls itself, does not need to pay its own people to return to it. If they truly are their people, then they truly have a right to return to said land. And of course, a great many Jews around the world very much refute that. When belonging requires subsidy, belonging is no longer the basis of the relationship, is it? The transaction has revealed the shift. The state is literally paying to maintain the narrative that it is a homeland. The financial instrument shows the distance between the story and the conditions sustaining it. The project is no longer held together by belief, it's being held together by expenditure. A state in war and in deficit does not hand out broad tax holidays unless the priority is not fiscal stability. The economy can go to hell in a handcart, it would seem, but population engineering takes priority. Identity didn't hold on to its own anymore, and so now the state is picking up the bill. This isn't the homeland calling its people home. This is a government paying to maintain its own demographic story, to hold together its own apartheid existence. A homeland doesn't need to bribe its own people to return to it. Zionism is a busted flush. And this is how desperate the Zionist state, a stolen homeland, as it is in reality, is to maintain its own mythology now. The news wasn't any better for Israel stateside this week either, as New York elected Zoran Mamdani as their mayor-elect, and he did it with an awful lot of Jewish backing, as it happens too. Not the narrative they wanted at all. So get the details of that story as a recommendation here. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I hope to catch you on the next one. Cheers, folks.